one thing you're always going to need if you're working on cars is test wires, jumper leads, whatever you want to call them. And you're going to find that you're going to break them all the time. You're going to replace them. You're going to want different sizes. Well, today I'm going to make a thicker wire. This is probably 12, maybe 10 gauge. And I'm going to make a red one that I'll use mostly for positive. And I've got one large clamp I'm going to use for battery posts, and then I'm going to use a smaller one so I can get onto smaller electrical terminals. Don't need a whole lot. Soldering gun, soldering torch, whatever you got. You're going to want some heat shrink, preferably same color as your wire. Some various pliers and needle nose, and some crimpers. And that's about it. So first thing we got to do is we will strip off about, I don't know, 5/8 of an inch off the end of this. If you're doing this also, you should probably use copper wire. That's going to be a little bit easier to work with, a little bit easier to solder. First thing we got to do is put your heat shrink on here. It's not going to go over that alligator clip later. So put that on, and you're going to slide this piece into here, just like that. And then I'm going to crimp it. I think we'll crimp first, and then we'll solder. And I will use uninsulated crimp for a 10 gauge. It should get us to right there. Okay, so uninsulated crimp, got it like that. And then I like to use this one and just crimp it down into just a little bit more of a V shape to get a little more pressure on these two tangs up top here. Just like that. So crimped it down just a little bit more to squeeze on that. All right, and next we will fire up the torch. That, and then we'll just run the solder straight down there, hopefully. Solder. Almost forgot that's the other important part of this, is you will need solder. Duh. Now, this is a torch that usually has a tip on it, but I like to take tip off of it and just use it like an open butane torch. Especially for something like this, I need to run a lot of solder down in. There we go. Once you get it coming out the top, you probably got enough. Let that cool off for a while before we slide this heat shrink down onto it. So there, and burn a little bit of that insulation. That's not a big deal, but you do want to scrape it off so it's roughly the same size still. All right, that's one end. Let's get this other end. It's a little bit different. This one is an open crimp and a solder joint, a little bit of a solder joint at least. So, and the way this works, it's actually got a little bit of a piece right here to slide some of the wire through, and we will, but we're not gonna slide all of it through. We'll just get some of it, sort of just to hold it in place. There we go. And you know what, just for a little bit better contact, what we'll do is I'll strip a little more off this. There we go. And I've split it into two, and the big section is not going to slide through this slot and this little section of just a couple wires. We're going to turn into like a retainer. I'll show you in a second. There we go. So I've got a couple of them just sticking through, and I really just want it temporarily so I can bend that into place. And you're right, I almost forgot heat shrink, and I told you that a second ago. See how easy it is to forget heat shrink? So heat shrink there, gonna need that. Slip it right over top of that. And then also a little insulating sleeve for this clamp. We'll slide that on there as well. And we'll take care of both of those here in a little bit. There we go. And I just want to bend a couple of those over, just like that. I really just want to hold the wire in place while I'm doing this. So, and then take some needle nose, squeeze this first side over, and then squeeze this second side over, just like that. Then we'll do our little W crimpers again right here, or W U-shape, whatever. It doesn't really matter. I just wanted to get a good solid bite on that. There we go. Let's crimp down. Now we will solder again. At least that's the plan. We will see what happens. Yeah, that should work just fine. There we go. That is plenty of solder to do the job. Now while that cools, we'll come back to this side, which has now cooled to the touch. We can slide our insulation up and over, slide up as far as you can, which in this case will be all the way to the screw. And we'll just fire it up and shrink it. There you go. Side one is done. As soon as this cools a little bit, well, I can slide the sleeve over it for the actual clamp. That's fine. There we go. It's a little hot, but I think we can get away with it because we're not holding the wire. So as long as we go quick, we can get to there. We'll heat shrink the rest of this. Whoop. All right. It's gonna be a little warm to touch, but we are done. Yeah, we're good. Okay, so I've got one big clamp for batteries, larger terminals. I've got one for smaller terminals. And we have made about a 5-foot long 10 gauge jumper wire, test lead, whatever you want to call it. Remember, if you're gonna do something like this, to help it last a little bit longer, 3-letter acronym you can use is CSI, crimp, solder, insulate. You want to go ahead and crimp it in place on these terminals. You want to solder that crimp, so that'll strengthen it, and then you insulate it, which will just pull the wire onto the clamp even more and strengthen it as much as you possibly can. So every jumper wire, CSI, crimp, solder, insulate. They'll last a long time, at least until the copper wires break or your clamps do. See you next time.